Hi everybody, welcome back to another video tutorial. Today we are going to learn the basics of UV unwrapping in Blender 2.8, and we are going to apply a simple texture, which is our Minecraft texture here, to create a Minecraft block in Blender. This will be split up into two videos, so please do make sure to check out the other video for the continuation of this. It's going to be awesome for you guys just to create something simple and to UV map it. So yeah, let's get started on creating our UV map. So when we start up Blender, we end up with our default cube, as we all know and love. Now when we go to our UV editing tab, which is up the top here, you can see that Blender has already given us a UV map. So what is a UV map, you ask? Well, a UV map is a set of coordinates that tell Blender where to place 2D textures on a 3D model. So for instance, as you can see with that texture we had open a few moments ago, it was a flat texture, and it was actually laid out, and we use that texture to wrap around the 3D model. So we need to tell Blender, okay, so when we give you a texture, you have to wrap it around the 3D model. Now unless we actually tell Blender itself where to put it, it will just put it where it feels best for itself, where it looks best for itself. That's why we UV unwrap our models, to tell Blender, put the texture here onto the model itself. Now if you look at this UV map here, okay, what you have is a representation of this entire cube split up into specific sections. So what Blender has done is Blender has cut this cube and said, okay, well, this is where I've cut it and this is what I've ended up with. So it's basically cut the cube to lay it down flat. So if you imagine this cube was a cardboard box, and you were to cut the top of the cardboard box and the sides of the cardboard box to lay it out flat on the ground, that's what you end up with here. And then what we do is we tell it what texture we want it to put on, and then what happens is we actually go and we wrap this texture back around our 3D model, and then we end up with our textured model. So let's have a look at the UV window. Okay, so the UV window has all of the data here for our UV map. Okay, so each one of these squares is a face on our cube. Okay, and each one of these little black dots is a vertice on our cube, and each one of these white lines is an edge. So as you remember in previous video tutorials, we talked about how two vertices make an edge. So if we selected this vertex here, and if we hold shift and left click this vertex here, as you can see, we've selected this edge. But what's happened is, because these are linked, the data is linked, it's actually come and selected this edge as well. So this is all linked together as one map. So when the texture is put on it, it all wraps around as one. To give you an idea of how a texture wraps around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a UV grid to this and give you an idea. Okay, so in order to add a UV grid, I need to first make a new texture. Okay, so if I come up here and I click new, and then I can leave it untitled, 1024 is fine, and turn alpha off, and then if I make from blank to UV grid and I press OK, now I have a UV grid. So you can't really see the outlines of the UV map at the moment, but if I press A on my keyboard and select everything, now you can see it. If this is getting a bit confusing for you, the background, you can click this little X up here and you can close it down. The texture will still be loaded in, and it will still load into our model in a second when we set up a shader node, but you can just remove it from here if it starts to get in your way, and you can actually see the layout itself. That's what I like to do. I like to remove it and then just work on the layout myself, and then if I wanted to bring it back, I could just click the drop down menu and then just click the name of the texture, but for this case it's untitled, and then I can bring it back. Okay, so now we have this texture here and we have the UV map, and there's nothing on our cube here. First of all, what we want to do is we want to actually go into a material preview. So if we press Z on our keyboard, so that's Z on our keyboard and material preview, and we have a look at it, we can now see the default material, which is white. So what we want to do is we want to tell Blender, okay, so we want you to put this grid onto this cube. So how we do that is through our shading tab. So if we go to our shading tab up the top, now we're in our shading tab, and what we have is we have a principled BSDF shader, okay, connected to a material output. Principled BSDF shader, what it will do is it will calculate all the information that is here, and it will put it onto any object that we have in here that is the material output. So here is the material and here is the principled BSDF. Now to connect and disconnect these ports, these connections from each side, you just hold left click on your mouse and then you can disconnect, or you can hold left click and connect it. And as you see now, this is black because what it's doing is there's nothing to be transferred from here to here. But if I connect this again, it's telling it, okay, put on a default white color. And if I was to change this color to anything like green, purple, blue, as you can see now, the blue color is there. And if I go back to my UV editing tab, as you can see now, the blue color is on the cube as well. So it's basically turned around and put what was on the principled BSDF shader onto the cube itself. So going back into my shading tab, now what I want to do is I want to put the texture onto it. So I wanted to display the texture that I just created, which was the UV grid. So to do that, I need to add a shader and an image texture. Okay, so I need to go to I can go to add, and then I can go to texture and then image texture, and I can click it like that, or I can, and then I get this here, which is a node, and then I just hold left click once and drop it into place. So I can do it like that, or I can go Shift A on my keyboard, just as easy. Shift A, texture, and then image texture, and then it's the same thing. So as you can see now, we have our image texture, and what we're going to do is we're going to click the drop down menu here, and as you can see, we have our texture, which is untitled. This is our UV grid, and now we can simply just connect the color output here to the base color, and once we do that, now we have our UV grid. So now what this is doing is this is saying, okay, so this is your texture, it's in the principled BSDF, now the material output should show the texture itself. And that's what we've done. We've actually went to the texture, to the principled BSDF, and we've put it into the material output itself. So now we go back to UV editing, and as you can see, our cube is there, and we have our default texture on it. So that is, Blender has put out the cube for us ourselves, and if you look up here at the top, you see that you have these various different selection modes. So you have edge selection mode, and you have face selection mode, or UV island selection mode, where you can select specific islands of the UV and stuff. And you also have this UV sync selection, where you can actually work on your model while you are editing your UV map. So for instance, if I was to select this face here, which is this one over here, I can press G and I can move it out of place and various stuff like that, and I can edit the UV map depending on what I want to do, and edit my texture into place. But the general rule of thumb is to always have your UV map in this 0 to 1 grid. So 0 1 0 1, always in this grid here, so you don't get any distortion and stuff like that. So you can edit your UV map to whatever way you want, but right now at the moment this is pretty much okay. But what we need to do is we sometimes need to unwrap our own models as well, and this is where it gets into the process of learning how to unwrap properly and how to unwrap our models itself. So in the next video what we will do is we will learn about unwrapping our model, which will be this cube here. We'll delete this UV map and we'll delete this texture. We'll unwrap our model, we'll add a texture again, and then what we'll do is we'll add that Minecraft texture onto the actual cube itself, and we will get it all set up. And once it's all set up, then we should have a finished cube with the Minecraft texture on it, and hopefully it will look pretty good.